So we have been we started a series last week called Vision 24. And the goal behind this is as we really start thinking about what is our vision for this year for the Las Cruces Church of Christ. The elders and I, we met and we spent a long time talking about that. I'm sorry, Dave. I just don't know how to be quiet. It's a problem, all right? You all know. But it's our goal to, and what we want to do is we want to be about God's kingdom. And so this morning, what my goal is I want to lay out that vision as we look at 3 different texts, and we start laying out, well, this is where we want to be. These are the things we want to be about in 2024. And realistically, this is who we want and who we need to be about as the Las Cruces Church of Christ moving forward from now until we die, really, because I think these 3 things help us to stand in what God has called us to. So the first thing that we're going to look at, if you have your Bibles, turn with me over to Matthew chapter 5. Again, that's Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look at verses 13 through 16. Again, that's Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. So Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 13, it says this: "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Our first part of our vision is this: we want to pray for Las Cruces. We want to pray for our community. And realistically, what that means is one of our goals is not only do we want to pray for our city and pray for the hurt and pray for the brokenness. Church, I only have to make a drive up Amador and Lowman to see the brokenness. I only have to take a step down Picacho and I can see hurt. So not only do I want us to pray for our city, but realistically what we're looking at and what we've been talking about is how can we find more ways to get involved in our city. We want to be about spreading the good news. We want to be about a church that helps our broken community, because not only are we broken, but there's a lot of brokenness out in Las Cruces. So I don't know if you've noticed that or not. So we want to be about working in our community, and what that means then for each and every one of us is that means we must become salt and we must become light. Well, if we're to become salt, then that means we must work on ourselves, right? That means we've got to work on our own relationship with God, our own relationship in this church, our own relationship as we meet people who are strangers or outcasts or whatever else it may be. That means we have to work on ourselves, and that means we've got to be about what God has called us to be in this new year. That means that the things that seem to be separating you from God, we have to strive to take steps to stepping into that calling that God has placed on us. It's we talked in a sermon a few months ago about the fruits of the Spirit. It's a call that we have to step in and look at the fruits of the Spirit, and we have to ask ourselves, are we living this out? Is this where I am growing? Where am I falling short in these areas? That's how we become salt, is when we start to truly buy in and believe what we say we believe. Isn't that crazy? That's how we become salt. is we decide, not only am I going to read this and quote this, and I'm going to win Bible quizzes and Bible bowls, I'm going to live this. If we have head knowledge, but we have no heart change, guys, we're just studying for an ACT at that point. We have to live this out. And so as we become salt, then it becomes easy to be light. Because when we are salt, we are then light. Why is that? Because we become a beacon, because we are different, and then people want to know about that. Not only do we have to be about it, we have to live about it. I just made that up. I hope it sounded good. But we have to be about it, and we have to live about it. And then the world will see that, wow, they're different. They don't act the way that I expected Christians to. They don't even, this church, the Las Cruces Church of Christ, they are so loving. They are so kind. They find ways not only to invest their money, but they actually put their lives in place there. They live this out. And when we do that, then the community will see that. We want to pray for our community. But not only do we want to pray for our community, we want to be in our community. Right? At least that's my prayer. And I believe that's the prayer of the elders as well. Is we want to help this community grow. And so, if we want that, then that means all of us should want to see that grow. And if we all want to see that our community grow, that means it's going to take each and every one of us to step up and find ways to get involved and get plugged in to our community. And what that also means, unfortunately, is our Christian life cannot just be what happens at between 9:15 and 11:30 on Sundays. That means when we're being about our community, that means we're being a Christian between those horrible hours of 9 to 5, Monday through Wednesday, whatever days that is you work. That means, and this is something I got to work on, okay? All right? I have to wish, I got to be better about wishing that the University of Oklahoma would not shut its doors, okay? My mother-in-law laughed there, I'm sure. But anyway, no. But that means there has to be heart change. That means there's got to be things about us where we are more community-focused. And so that's part of our goal. And so we must learn to strive to live like Christ, interact like Christ, especially when we come face to face with the brokenness of our community. Especially when we come face to face with those who may be homeless. Especially whenever we come face to face with those who are broken in sin. Especially when we come face to face with those who look different than us, act different than us. We have to be salt and light, and what that means is we have to live like Christ and look like Christ. We'll never be perfect, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue Christ, right? And when we do that, we can then share what God has done in your life. Because I believe each and every one of you have a story, right? You have seen God move in your life. You have seen God do great things. You have seen God take you from wherever you were to where you are now. And some of you say, well, Darren, I don't have that great story. I've heard this from people before. Darren, I was born in the baptistry. You do have a story. You have a story of being faithful and not giving up on something your entire life. How many of you guys know people who, just out of curiosity, are divorced? How many people do you know people who have committed all kinds of things, and you know what they're looking for? How do I find a roadmap of what consistency is? How do I find what a roadmap is of faithfulness is? Because here's the deal, we live in a broken community with broken people who don't know what that is. And so we have an opportunity to share what that looks like. And that's not me talking down or anything else. I'm just letting you know that you have a story that is important. Those of you who have been married 50 plus years, you can be a mentor to those who are newlywed. You know that? You have an opportunity. So we want to pray and be about our community. And so our prayer is that this year we pray we are known as a community to the larger portion of Las Cruces. And speaking of community, our next goal is we really want to work on building community. So we're going to be in Ephesians 4, verses 1 through 7. So Ephesians 4, starting in verse 1, it says, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit. Just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ appointed it." So the second of our goals is we really have a desire to build a strong community. We want to be about growing our family in this church. And I think there's so many different ways that we do that. And we love our small groups. And I know a lot of you are involved or at least plugged in some point in small groups. And that's awesome. And our goal is, my goal is always, can we get everybody in a small group involved and plugged in? Why? Because it's so important. If it was important enough for the first century church, it's important in our community today. But we also understand that when we do have small groups, we can get into this problem where that becomes our cliques. And friend groups aren't necessarily a bad thing, but what we really also want to focus on this year is we want to focus on intergenerational ministry. And what does that mean? That means we want all the way from our children's program to our seniors to know one another. Do you know there was a study that was done in a book, it's called Sticky Faith, that it shows that children who have at least 3 mentors who are not their parents or their youth minister or their minister are more likely to stay involved in church and be a part of community when they get older. We want to be about a community that builds relationships. Why? Because we want to see the next generation succeed. We want to be about building strong community. And in our text, I think it's important that we understand that Paul understood the importance of community. He understood the need that the church be united and connected. He understood that people were not always going to get along. That's why he wrote what he said. Make every effort to be united. Make every effort to be one. Make every effort. Why? Because he understood that human nature is we're not always going to get along. And we have to work on being a family. You know, growing up, I had a brother. He was 7 years older than me. You all know this. And, there was a big age difference there. Many of you have siblings with big age differences. He used to lock me outside so he could have the house to himself. I'm sure, many of you who had siblings can have similar stories. And you know what I realized about siblings? No matter what I do, he's always going to be my brother. And that meant when he was alive that, we had to do holidays together. We had to live together. We had to learn how to coexist. And I couldn't just say, I'm done with you, right? There are some of you at times where you're like, I have disliked my sibling. Don't even deny it. But you know what? At the end of the day, that's still your brother. That's still your sister. You still grew up in that same household. You still grew up and you still came under the same house with the same rules and everything else. And if I were to ask you, how many of you are close, still talk to your brothers and your sisters and your siblings today? And how many of you guys spend time with one another? I'm sure 98% of you would raise your hand. And I think in the same way, we have to be real. We have to realize that in this church community, we are a family. And that means there's going to be disagreements. That means we're going to have our feelings hurt. That means there's going to be problems. But that also means there's going to be good moments as well. And what that also means is we cannot allow problems or whatever else may rise in the church family to keep us from being a strong family. Because you wouldn't cut off your own family. So we have to realize that we have to live together as family. And so we have to be pursuing that. And that's why we have to learn to be gentle. We need to not be so brash at times. We need to not jump to conclusions so fast at times. We have to be patient. Oh man, if I have talked to many of you and you've looked and you've had family members that maybe they've kind of gone away from Christ and you're just like, I don't know what to do. But you still love them, right? And so you have to be patient with them. In the same way, we have to be patient with those who are in our body, who may be doing things that we disagree with or have different thoughts or whatever it may be. We were all in different places at one point. So we have to learn to be patient. We have to learn to be humble. Oh, that's hard, right? We have to realize that our way is not always the best way, and that's okay. That rhymed. And we have to bear with one another in love. That means we need to bear one another's burdens. That means we are there for those who are hurting. That means we surround people and we love people. That means we go and see people in the hospital. That means we go and visit them when they've lost a loved one. That means we try and find ways to help and serve any way we can. That's what it means to be a family, church. And that's what Paul is calling us to. And we have to learn to make every effort to keep the unity of the body. And what does that mean? That means we have to learn to understand one another. We have to talk to one another. We have to communicate with one another. And when we can do that and try to understand where their people are coming from, then not only do we grow in our relationship with each other, but I also believe we grow in our relationship with God. And when we do fall short, which we will, we must always remember that God gives us grace. And we can step in and we receive that grace every day. We all have issues. We all have struggles. We all have burdens. And I know sometimes we look at people and they're like, oh, why can't you figure it out? Or if you're like me, why can't I figure it out? I know I've told y'all this before, but I thought by 30, I would have a lot of things figured out by now. I just thought, once you hit 70, you didn't have sin anymore, okay, when I first came to Christ. I just thought that was a thing, all right? But we have to remember that God gives us grace freely. And we are allowed to step in and receive that grace daily. And so our prayer is that this year, that you as a church will find ways to get involved and get plugged in to this family. Because you have a story to tell. You have experiences that people in this church need. And we want you to fully commit to the Las Cruces Church of Christ this year. We want this to be a priority in your life. Why? Because God wanted the community to be important. We want you to know your brothers and sisters in Christ this year. And speaking of getting involved and getting plugged in, our final goal for the year is we really want to start looking at the next generation of this church. So our last text is going to be Psalm 78, and that's going to be verses 1 through 8. If you'll turn in your Bibles with me. So Psalm 78, starting in verse 1, it says this: "My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power and His wonders He has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach who? Their children. To teach their generation, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget His deeds, but would keep His commands. They would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not found faithful to Him." So our final vision for this year, as we wanted to keep this simple, is this: we want to focus more on the next generation. A minister once told me, he said, Darian, if your church is not focusing on the next generation, that's the lifeblood of your church. Why is that? Because we have to look at the next generation. If not, if this is it, the church dies with us. Isn't that crazy? And so we have to be about working with the next generation and helping them to know God. And so what that looks like is we need to strive to contribute and equip the next generation to stand up and continue to grow the kingdom of God. We want the next generation to stand up for what they believe in. And not only do we want them to stand up for what they believe in, we want them to contribute to the continuation of the growth of the kingdom of God. And what that means, as the psalmist says, is we have to teach the next generation to stand up for God and to know God, to not be afraid of their faith, and to stand up for what they believe in. And it's more important to understand what they believe in, but this is huge, and I think we all have to do this. Why they believe in what they believe. We need to stand up for what we believe in and understand why we believe what we believe. And when we do that, we have to teach them also to have a desire to seek and know God. That means they have to have a deepened relationship with God. And so, if we're going to do that, that means we all have to work together to help raise this next generation. And that means those of you who have been in the faith a while, you're not off the hook. How many of you, just real quick show of hands, and I just want you, this is for, edification for people. How many of you guys have been a Christian for 30 years? 40? See, those are the people we need to be looking at. That's amazing, church. And what that means is that you have wisdom, right? You've probably experienced and seen a few things in your 30 or 40 years, right? You've probably experienced the world in different ways, and there are probably things that you saw and you learned that you could pass on to the next generation. So we need to be about mentoring. We need to mentor our younger families. We need to mentor our new believers. We need to mentor those who have just recently gotten married. We need to mentor. I mean, I'll take some mentoring. We just had a kid, and thank you all for all of your advice. But we need to mentor people to raise godly children. We need to mentor them to understand what is important. Because don't we struggle with trying to figure out what is important in our lives? Because there's going to be 100 million different things that tell you this is important. And how many of those things are going to save your soul? We have to be about teaching and mentoring the next generation. Because we really need to know what's important. There are too many broken families. There's too many people who are so busy that they don't know God. And what we need to hear from our older members and those who have been around the faith for long enough, what should our priorities be? What does a faithful walk in Christ for 30 to 40 years look like? What does it look like for 50 years? What does a marriage look like for 30 years? What does that look like? Guys, we've got to mentor and help teach the next generation because we don't know. And so be there for us as we walk and try to learn this thing called faith. And so we must teach the next generation who God is and to teach them about the good news. Do you know, while I was in youth ministry, there was a survey that I was made aware of. Teens. How many of you guys are thinking about teenagers? How many of you are wondering about your own kids who will be teenagers? 2 people. Great. There's a survey that went out, and this shocked me when I heard about this. That teenagers, they don't necessarily care about the baptism stuff and all that. That's good. Don't get me wrong. Baptism is great, and we need to get there. But there's a problem that they're missing. We've been so good about teaching them the fundamentals that you know what we haven't taught them? Who is God? So what's going on is we have a generation where teenagers, they do not know who God is. And yet we want to skip steps and we want to talk about all of these different things. But maybe what we need to do is we need to be teaching the generation who is God. And when they know who God is, then we can start telling them, what did God do for you? And when they understand what God did for you, then we can share with them the good news. Then we can share with them, hey, we want you to give your life to Christ in baptism. We want you to submit because God loves you so much that He sent His Son to die for you. But we can't get there if they don't know who He is. So we have to be teaching our children who God is. And I also think it's fair to say, not only is who God is, but what has God done for you? And whenever they can see that in their parents, and they see that in their lives, they start to follow that more. And when they see that in you, and they see you live that out, that makes them want to follow Christ even more. So we need to be about teaching God who God is, what has He done, and what does that mean for your life? We want to be about reaching the younger generation. We want to be about loving the other generation, the younger generation. And what that means is we have to sit down and try and understand them. I remember when I was in high school, everybody would talk bad about my generation, the millennials. And it was crazy. And I remember, I've told y'all, my mother and my grandmother, we had moments where like church was important here and there. And I remember going to a church and, they thought it was funny, but they made a song about how bad millennials are. It's funny, but do you think Do you think millennials would want to be a part of that church? We have to show love and compassion. We have to get to know the next generation if we are going to grow our community. And I think this is true for across any faith across the board. We have to love the next generation, and we have to teach and raise up the next generation. And how do we do that? By being active and involved in the lives of the next generation and being active and involved in the kingdom. And so our prayer is for us to work on building and growing the next generation of God's church. And as we come to a close, our vision is to pray for Las Cruces. We want to make an impact in this community. Second, we want to build our community. Our goal is for that each and every one of you would know people in this church. And here's the kicker, that are outside of your group. And we hope and pray that you build relationships there. And we also want to focus on the next generation because we want to see a generation rise up who knows and stands up for God. And so my prayer is that you will partner with us as we strive to serve and impact God's kingdom, because together we can make an impact not only in our church, but our community. And we can stand up for the future of God's church. But it takes all of us working together. And so what we need workers.